Hello everyone. In this unit we're going to be looking at the basics of U.S. government. For some of you this may be a bit of a repeat from any American government courses you've taken in the past. So our government, basically it was founded on two main ideas, freedom and taxations. Those were the main reasons why we revolted from the British back in the 1780s, because of the loss of freedoms and taxations. An example of some of the loss of freedoms was the Massachusetts Assembly was closed down. Another loss was if you wanted to have a town meeting, you had to have a royal governor's permission, which basically meant there would be someone from the government there listening in on the town meeting. The other issue was taxation. A lot of colonists felt like that they were being unfairly taxed to pay for the debt the British government ran up during the French Indian War that ended in 1763. And so they felt like they were being targeted unfairly in this tax. Okay, so once the United States got its independence from Britain, our first form of government was known as the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles turned out to be a miserable failure. Okay, it had a lot of problems. One of the problems was there was no national judiciary. And what I mean by that, there was no national court system to resolve disputes between people and the government or governments with each other. Okay, so if you had two states that had a major problem. Another issue was the national government could not tax, so it could not raise money. Also, the Articles needed unanimous consent to amend the Articles. So you needed all 13 states to approve amendments to the Articles of Confederation. And then finally, you needed 9 out of 13 states to approve a new law, which was very difficult to do. 9 out of 13 is probably about 70%. So it was very difficult for the Articles of Confederation to be successful. So eventually Shays' Rebellion leads to the end of the Articles of Confederation. So, what's the purpose of our government? Okay, you see 4 of them up here. Keep order, promote liberty, resolve conflicts, and also provide services and benefits in this day and age. Well, the oldest one is keeping order. Okay, human beings don't behave on their own. Okay, and so we need government to do that, and we see that a lot in the police force and the FBI and things like that. Okay, our government also has another tough job, is promoting liberty. Because remember, freedoms were one of those reasons why we revolted, so promoting liberty is very important to us. Okay, another purpose of government is to resolve conflicts. Okay, inevitably people are going to have conflicts with each other, and so the government is there to resolve those conflicts. If the government's not there to resolve conflicts, a lot of times people will take it upon themselves to resolve conflicts, and that can lead to big problems. Finally, provide services and benefits. Okay, when it comes to our government providing services and benefits, school is an example of a service and a benefit. Okay, going to school. Our government has decided an educated population is very important, so the government tries to provide as best they can that service of education. Okay. Also, it could be the service of clearing the roads after a heavy snowstorm. Okay, so those are some things the government tries to do, is try and provide benefits and services for people. Now, our government, we created what was called a democratic republic. Basically, that means that people vote. They vote for elected officials, and then those elected officials make decisions for us. Okay? So, for example, the people of the United States elected Barack Obama as president. Barack Obama makes those decisions on our behalf. We also have a Constitution in the United States. The definition of a Constitution is simply a written plan of government that spells out the powers that the government has, but in our case in the United States, it also puts limitations on the government. For example, the best one is the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights start off by saying Congress shall make no law. So that's setting limitations on government. And in the United States, the Constitution is the highest law of the land. Okay? Because it tells the courts, the president, and Congress what they can and can't do. So here a practice question to think about. In the Articles of Confederation, the national government could not tax. What were two other weaknesses of the Articles? Okay. One of the weaknesses was there was no national court system to resolve disputes between people in the states. And then secondly, in order to amend the Articles of Confederation, you needed all 13 states to agree to that amendment. It's a very difficult process. The oldest purpose of government is to keep order. What are two other purposes of the U.S. government? Another purpose of the government is to promote liberty, in our case, and then also resolve disputes between people or people in the government. Okay, remember that the government tries to resolve those disputes where people won't take to the streets and try and settle it themselves. Okay, and then the other one is provide services and benefits. The Constitution explains the powers the government has, but also sets blank on the government. The answer to that question is limits on the government. Okay? Sets limitations. Our Constitution, that written plan of government, sets limitations on government as well as explaining the powers. So as you can take a look here at this brief little quote about being President of the United States. So, let's start off with the three branches of government. Probably a lot of this is very repetitive to some of you, but it doesn't hurt to just remind you. Okay, we have three branches of government. The legislative branch makes the laws. That's composed of Congress. The executive branch is the president, and they enforce the laws. And then the judicial branch, their job is to interpret the law. Now, when it comes to the legislative branch, we have two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate's important powers are to confirm appointments. And what I mean by that are federal judges, ambassadors, and other people to the U.S. government. Okay, so they have that power of approval. They also approve treaties. The Senate also is responsible for approving agreements with other countries. Now, when it comes to the U.S. House of Representatives, their biggest power, so to speak, is the power of the purse, or money. And the Constitution says that revenue bills, or money bills, something that may deal with taxes, must start in the U.S. House of Representatives. So that's the most important power that the House has, is if there's any kind of tax bill, whether it's to increase taxes or cut taxes, it has to start originally in the House of Representatives. Now, when it comes to the president has to carry out the laws that Congress makes. But also the president is given additional responsibilities. Keep in mind, the president, at the time the Constitution was written, was a full-time job. Congress, on the other hand, was a part-time job. And so they only met a few months of the year. And so the president was given those military and diplomatic responsibilities. And here's what I mean by that. A country wasn't going to wait for Congress to get back in session to declare war on us. The British wouldn't wait till Congress convened before they would declare war. So since the president was a full-time job, he was given a lot of those responsibilities. So the president is commander-in-chief, which means he makes a lot of the military decisions. And typically the president is given a lot of leeway with this power, okay, to make those decisions. However, we do have the War Powers Act, and that sets limitations on what the president can do. Simply put, this means that if the United States is engaged in combat, the president must notify Congress within 48 hours of hostilities starting. Then he has to get congressional approval within 60 days of the conflict. Then if he doesn't get that approval, he has 30 days to start the withdrawal process of our troops. So the War Powers Act tries to limit what the president can do. However, what we've seen lately is when the War Powers Act was passed during the Vietnam War, what we've seen after that is presidents will actually ask for permission to have a conflict ahead of time. A good example of that was George W. Bush in 2002-2003 when it came to invading Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein. President Bush asked for permission ahead of time, Congress gave it to him, and that's how he got around the War Powers Act. Another responsibility of the president is to represent the United States overseas. It would be very difficult for countries to make agreements if they had to go through Congress and the president. So the president represents the United States overseas. Plus, it's easier to try to make an agreement with one person than an entire legislative body like Congress. Now, when it comes to the courts, the Constitution only created the U.S. Supreme Court, and they have final decision on the laws passed. And their job is to make sure that this fits within the guidelines of the Constitution. That's the job of the courts. Okay? Our courts hear actual cases. They don't hear hypothetical cases. They only hear actual cases. So in order for the Supreme Court to make a ruling, they actually have to hear a lawsuit. Okay? That's very important to understand. Our court does not give hypothetical judgments or what-if judgments. They have to actually be a court case before them. Okay? So our Supreme Court has the final decision on the laws passed to see if they fit within the guidelines of the Constitution. The Supreme Court usually starts in October and runs through June each year. Now, how do we change the U.S. Constitution if need be? Okay, it's a two-step process. The first step is the proposal stage. Okay, and notice the next two little points here is an or. You need 2/3 of both houses of Congress or 2/3 of the states call for a convention to propose amendments. Okay, so it only has to be one of those two. And in the proposal stage, all the amendments we've had to the Constitution have come through 2/3 of both houses of Congress calling for it. We've never had to use that second one. 2/3 of states call for a convention to propose amendments. The second step gets even tougher. It's called ratification. Okay? Now, in ratification, you notice the fraction amount goes up. In proposal, it was 2/3. Now it's 3/4. So you have to have 3/4 of the state legislatures agree to the new constitutional amendment, or 3/4 of the states hold ratifying conventions and pass the amendment. That's an or as well. You don't have to do both. Okay? 26 of our 27 amendments have come from state legislatures agree. One amendment, the one to get rid of prohibition, was done through ratifying conventions. And that was done that way because they thought the state legislatures would not want to get rid of prohibition. So they put it through ratifying conventions and it passed, and alcohol became legal again. Finally, changes to the Constitution can be made through interpretation. What I mean by that is people expect a lot more out of the president in 2014 than they did in 1789. Okay? People expect a lot more of the president. Okay? A long time ago, people did not expect the president to come up with ideas to problems. Now, in 2014, everybody always wants to know what the president wants to do about a problem. Okay? And so that's different. Americans expect the president in 2014 to be more active in legislation. So even just our own interpretation of what the Constitution means. Who knows what Americans in, say, 2090 think about the Constitution and how they interpret it. Now, changing the Missouri Constitution is a little bit easier. Okay, you have the same two basic steps, proposal and ratification. But Missouri's a little bit different. All you need, one possible method, is a majority of both houses of our General Assembly. Another possible proposal way is through the initiative, where 8% of registered voters submit an amendment in each congressional district. They get the signatures, they turn it in to the Secretary of State, and then they put it on the next ballot. Or, a third possible option is the Constitutional Convention, where we actually, in Missouri, would call together people to draft amendments to our state constitution. Now, if you look at ratification, ratification is simply a majority of the people, whereas in the U.S. Constitution, you need 3/4 of the state legislatures or those ratifying convention in each state. But in Missouri, all you need is a majority of the people who turn out and vote. So it's much easier to change the Missouri Constitution than it is to change the U.S. Constitution.